Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. So today we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And as you can see on my map, it has been a clear-cut, irrefutable Ukrainian victory in the vicinity of Bakhmut. That's what I'm supposed to say. Most YouTube channels, content providers right now are, for all intents and purposes, required to announce nonstop Ukrainian victories. It is incredibly unpopular in a variety of circles to report accurately what is happening in the conflict. Now, I have had to go all the way back to February, before the Russians seized control of Bakhmut, to kind of give you this example. Now, when I say I'm trying to report this accurately, that is exactly what is happening. If the Ukrainian objective, and it was an objective, to maintain control of Bakhmut was not accomplished, then that would mean the Russians won. They achieved victory within the vicinity of Bakhmut. So again, here we are at the beginning of February, as Russian forces were on the outskirts of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian objective, massive amounts of Ukrainian forces were brought in to protect and defend Bakhmut from the Russians taking it over. This is what happened over the course of the next few months within the vicinity of Bakhmut. This is irrefutable. This is what happened. You cannot change that. This mapping system that I'm using is a pro-Ukrainian site, and I'm trying to be as impartial as possible. So let's look as the battles unfolded in this fairly dense urban environment that was Bakhmut to where we're at right now. Here we go. This may take a little bit, so be patient. The red is the area controlled by Russians. You can see it's steadily moving forward. That means they are pushing back the Ukrainian defenders. They are defeating them on the battlefield and then steadily pushing them west. This is what happens in war when one side is winning over the other. Now, this is not me making this up. This is what is happening on the ground. The historical record will show this ultimately. Okay? The Ukrainians are not winning in this area of the conflict. Now, right about now, we're thinking about this Ukrainian counteroffensive that's going to happen, which has not occurred. So again, Bakhmut is now effectively under Russian control. Yes, there was a counter-operation south and north of Bakhmut that achieved limited gains. It has not liberated Bakhmut. It has not pushed the Russians out of Bakhmut. It has gained territory in hundreds of meters south and north of Bakhmut. But again, the Russians, for all intents and purposes, are fully in control of Bakhmut. The only areas not disputed right now is essentially 4 apartment buildings on the far west outskirts of Bakhmut. The other areas are under the control, or there are continued battles taking place in these areas for the city of Bakhmut. And that's just what's happening. I get that for the Ukrainian sympathizer that is watching the channel, it is different than what you are hearing on other mainstream media outlets, because I'm not lying to you. I'm simply telling you the truth. I'm telling you what's happening on the ground as the Russians and the Ukrainians fight this war out. That's all I'm doing. And right now, you have a situation where the Russians are victorious in Bakhmut. Now, the Ukrainians are attempting limited counterattacks to the north and to the south, quite possibly to try to get the remaining forces of the Ukrainian military out of this Bakhmut pocket that has been created. Now, have the Russians sustained losses over the last few days? Yes, they have. There have been casualties on both sides. The Russians are reporting as much. What's interesting in this conflict, when you look at Western nation states, normally you would associate that with transparency. Democratic nation states, Western democratic nation states, tend to release information about what is happening to its soldiers on the battlefield. That's not what's happening in this conflict. It's very interesting to see that the United States, the Ukrainians, are being being very tight-lipped about any successful Russian military operation. Any strike that the Russians conduct inside of Ukraine, and there are hundreds of them, against military and infrastructure targets, key infrastructure targets related to the continuation of the war. The Ukrainians do not talk about that. They do not announce it. They do not announce any form of casualties. Nothing is reported. Nothing. The only item that the Ukrainian state reports on is civilian casualties. That's it. And it's done in a manner that will achieve a political or propagandized goal. In some cases, creating a false narrative. The same activity that the Russians are conducting, the Ukrainians are conducting as well. The Ukrainians are hitting civilian targets. Now, is it being done with intent? Most likely not. We would see a lot far greater devastation if both sides were doing that. But for the most part, they're targeting troops on the battlefield that are dug into these civilian areas. But again, in terms of just the reporting on the Ukrainian side, incredibly difficult to ascertain what's going on in the... they've made it a crime where you can't report inside of the Ukraine. And I get pushed back about that too, calling the Ukraine the Ukraine. It is the Ukraine. It is the borderlands. I'm just not going to say borderlands. It's the borderlands. Get over it. So that's kind of where we sit right now. Again, we'll continue to watch this very, very closely, what's happening in Bakhmut. But right now, again, unless this changes, unless you see this area in red revert back to the color of this area or turn to blue in this area, right now it has been a battlefield victory for Russian forces in seizing control of Bakhmut. It's just what's happened on the ground. So we'll continue to watch for any sign of this Ukrainian counteroffensive that the Ukrainians have been talking about for some time. We think right now the pause button has been hit. We think that the concession prize was this offensive operation towards Bakhmut. I believe they were trying to liberate Bakhmut. They were trying to conduct a double envelopment operation to encircle Bakhmut And so far, it's achieved very limited success. It just has. It has not broken up these two Russian envelopment salients that have occurred to the south and to the north. And more importantly, they have not pushed, meaning they, the Ukrainians, have not pushed to the southern sector and northern sector and then have the ability to attack Bakhmut both from the west, the south, and the north. I believe that is and was the Ukrainian plan. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, this is what has happened thus far in this Ukrainian counterattack. This is just where we're at right now. And I think eventually history will prove me right. Just as I said, go back to the very first videos prior to the war kicking off. And I talked about this was going to be a very long, very bloody war, contrary to mainstream media on the initial stages saying this would be a quick, multi-day war that would see the Russians roll into Kiev. Didn't happen. From the very beginning, I was telling you this was going to be a long, drawn-out, bloody affair that was not going to turn out like many people thought. Go watch the videos. They're out there. So that's where we are. We'll continue to observe. We'll continue to report. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.